I would like to thank you all for coming today. We're going to be talking about why you should use my book, Gothic Poetry for the Dark Side, as an educational resource. I got most of my information about poetry off of about.com on contemporary literature, and reading A-to-Z.com and Poetry from the Heart. So you ask yourself, why would you use a book from a not-so-famous author alongside your educational material? Well, before we talk about that, let me tell you, there are many styles of poetry, and as teachers, you know this, but let me just name a few. There's acrostic, ballad, free verse, and haiku, but my poetry is a combination of monorhyme, pantome, quatrain, and free verse. Let me read you one of my poems. It's called In Your Eyes. In your eyes I am lost forever, like deep blue pools that go on forever. Tell me you love me, I need to hear, for fear I've lost, that is what's dear. In your eyes, lost forever, like deep blue pools that go on forever. Look in my eyes, what do you see? Forever, love, it is me, it is me. I think this book would be a benefit at the junior high and high school level, and the reason I read this poem is because there are students already benefiting from this book. A student in Ohio asked me if she could use the poem that I just read and her poetry assignment, so I gave her permission, and she got an A+. So I think that's great. I never met this student before, and she just read my poem, and she really loved it. So that is why I think it would be a benefit to you guys, and why I think it would help your students. So let's talk about why use this alongside a poetry lesson. It's going to show that even your students can publish their own work. I published mine, they can too. Maybe as a class assignment with their teacher. You don't have to use one style of poetry. I don't, they don't have to either. You don't have to study poetry to be a poet. I didn't, and I am. I've been writing poetry since the age of 9. You can express your feelings through poetry. That is what I do, and that's what your students can do as well. So why compare my poetry to famous poets like Edgar Allan Poe, Emily Dickinson, or even Shakespeare? Well, it's going to open up conversation and debate. It's going to show that we're not very different from each other as poets. The famous poets, your students, or even me, we think really deeply, and we put our feelings on paper. And there's a lot of poetry out there that's written by people who aren't famous, and it's just as good. I've read some of the poems from some of the students at the school, and they're excellent. They're just as good as any of the famous authors. The only difference is they're not famous, but they might be one day. It's going to encourage them to write their own poetry. So if you use this book as an educational resource, it's going to teach them to search for patterns and to know that poetry is an acceptable means of expressing themselves. It's going to encourage them to write their own poetry and to know that if they so choose, they can have their work published. I believe that every moment is a teaching moment. And my obscure poetry book with its imperfections, I believe will be a benefit to the young minds who want to learn. And along the way, if they didn't like poetry in the first place, they might learn to at least appreciate it. Thank you.